Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on how investing in building positive gender relations can prevent violence in South Africa. My name is Senzekile Bengu. I am a researcher in the Justice and Violence Prevention Program at the Institute for Security Studies, and I'm also a co-convener of the Violence Prevention Forum, and I'll be chairing today's webinar. Before we start, please note that this is a public event being broadcast live on YouTube. Therefore, Chatham House rules do not apply. In today's webinar, we will hear from 3 speakers representing 3 organizations that have been working deliberately to build positive relations between genders, families, communities, relationships that are grounded in respect, trust, equality, and kindness. As we know, South Africa faces high levels of violence, with one of the highest murder rates in the world. And almost every day we hear about an incident of violence in our community and in our schools. Women, children, boys, and girls are most vulnerable. The first South African National Gender-Based Violence Study found that 1 in 3 women have experienced physical violence in their lives, and that 20% of men had recently experienced physical violence outside of the home. And we know from research that the risk of victimhood and perpetration of violence is linked to experiences of childhood. When a child, a boy or a girl, experiences high levels of violence in their childhood, they become more likely to become a victim or perpetrator of violence later in life. They're also more likely to drop out of school and become unemployed, therefore repeating the cycle of violence and adversity. And the normalization of violence as a means to deal with conflicts and disagreements in relationships at home and in communities is one of the drivers of this cycle. And therefore, preventing violence is going to require us to shift harmful norms and plant the values that we want to see in our society. And understanding these values and how they drive behavior is the first step. And investing in interventions that address these harmful gender norms, such as parenting, support programs, dialogues with fathers and men, is how we will build a different society. And therefore, we're excited as the Violence Prevention Forum and the Institute for Security Studies to be marking the start of 16 days of activism for no violence against women and children with this seminar, where we will be discussing the new research by Tales of Turning and the Violence Prevention Unit in the Western Cape Department of Health and Wellness that looked at social media and how social media tells us about gender norms. And we'll also be hearing from 2 practitioners that are promoting positive gender relations in families and in communities. And we are doing this because we feel we must talk more about these efforts to prevent violence. This is our 3rd webinar as the Violence Prevention Forum in a series that hopes to showcase examples of what works and to give us the lessons that we need to build safer and prosperous societies. And with that, let us begin. Our webinar is going to be an hour and a half, and we intend the next 90 minutes to be a discussion, and we encourage engagement in the chat as well as in the room, especially when we get to the Q&A. We are going to spend the first 40 minutes hearing from the speakers, and each speaker will have between 10 and 15 minutes to share. And after our final speaker, we are going to open to a Q&A. As our speakers are sharing, please keep your microphones on mute until we get to the Q&A. And if you can, please write in the chat, engage with the research and the inputs that is being shared. And it would be lovely to see some faces for those who feel comfortable to also share their cameras. And with that, I would like to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is going to be Jenna-Lee Strugnell. She is the founder and director of Tales of Turning, an NPO that utilizes social media and technology for peace building. Jenna-Lee holds a BA in English and psychology and an honors degree in psychology and a master's in peace building. She's a Canon Collins scholar who's committed to social justice and has received numerous awards, such as the Vodacom Change and the World Programme. And today she will be sharing the findings from the gender norms and social media analysis that was conducted by Tales of Turning with the Violence Prevention Unit of the Department of Health and Wellness in the Western Cape. And the key objectives of this research was to analyze social media discourse on masculinity and femininity and how they influence aggression, control, and relationship expectation amongst the young people residing in the Western Cape. And with that, over to you, Jenna-Lee.
Thank you so much, Senzi. I'm so happy to be here with all of you. So we conducted social media listening research for the Violence Prevention Unit of the Western Cape government. As Senzi shared, the objective was to look at social media discourses around gender norms amongst youth in the Western Cape that lead to aggression and control in relationships. How we did this is that we looked at the social media conversations on public social media over a period of 2 years, and we analyzed over 33,000 posts or data points during this time. The methodology we followed, the first part is the discovery phase, where we looked for keywords. So on your screen, you can see an example of a sample of the keywords. They are in different South African languages, and they use colloquial terms and phrases. So a keyword is what you would put in social media to bring up all the conversation around that word or phrase. We found the keywords by using our subject matter expertise, literature reviews, working with reference groups, and then we also had a team of digital dialogue facilitators who are actually on public social media, dialoguing around the narrative of gender norms and collecting keywords at the same time. Once we had a list of 600 keywords, we started testing and refining the keywords by inputting them into the social media listening tool. So we wanted to see that we were getting conversations that were relevant to the narrative, and we were getting really good quality data. From that, we narrowed it down to 160 keywords, and we worked with the reference group to start discussing the data that was coming out, and really looking into it so that we could make sure the data is relevant and useful. From that, we did a thematic analysis on the data to see which different themes were emerging. What's really exciting about the social media listening research is it's a way of deeply listening to thousands and thousands of people, seeing what their perspectives are, what they're grappling with, and what their needs and solution are. It also shows us the colloquial terms that people are using. So when we're engaging, we're not only using academic terms from the sector, we're really using language that meets people where they're at. You can see how the conversation changes over time. So it's good for monitoring and evaluation for impacts of interventions. You can also see what's causing the spikes in conversation and geographical hotspots of misogyny and gender-based violence. So from the analysis, we did a thematic analysis, and we identified the main themes. The main themes are the themes that have the most mentions or posts behind them, so the highest number of data points. The first theme I want to explore is around social norms and stereotypes around women and girls. There was a lot of reference to hatred towards women that was driven by fear and resentment. There was also internalized misogyny, so hatred of women towards other women, which I think is a really important area to explore. And this was also described as mean girl energy. Another key trend was around the fear woman. So telling people to fear women, and people would take cases of women perpetuating violence and say, this is why we need to fear women. And it's also linked to a fear of women's independence and power. There were discussions around the social norms that put pressure on women and how women experience backlash if they don't conform to these social norms. Another important sub-theme was around women and sexuality. So many of the conversations centered around body count, which is how many sexual partners a person has had. And here the double standards were very clear, because men were not often judged for having a high body count. It was it was normalized for men to have more sexual partners, whereas women were harshly judged for having higher body counts. And this related to a lot of conversation about the value of women. So what makes a woman wife material, or what makes a woman a high value woman? And this is also linked to conversations around side chicks, where men have more than one girlfriend. And here again, the blame was placed on women rather than men, and saying if a woman has a high body count, she is only useful for entertainment or for being a side chick. So here you can see how women's sexual purity was associated with a higher value of women. This also relates to body shaming. So there was a lot of body shaming against women online. And this was also often done by other women. And so there was even victim blaming in this, a lot of victim blaming in this conversation, where if a woman didn't meet traditional beauty standards, then they were blamed for even putting a photo online, because people would say that they shouldn't have even put that photo online. And here there's also an intersectionality which was really prevalent throughout the research between misogyny and gender norms and racism and xenophobia, because it was also discussed how traditional beauty standards are often set by the West. The next theme is around stereotypes around men and boys. So here there was a lot of conversations around real men and Indoda must, which means men must. And this was conversations around the expectations that are placed on men, often around being strong, being a leader, dominant, and able to provide for the family. There were again relationship expectations and the double standards around infidelity, where it was normalized for men to have many partners, whereas women were blamed and shamed for infidelity. And women expressed their frustrations with men with comments like men are trash or hate men. And there was a lot of backlash from men around this, seeing it as an attack on their identity rather than attack on gender-based violence or violent behavior. On the other hand, there were many authors or social media users challenging these harmful kind of gender norms or expectations placed on men, saying that they worried about the intergenerational trauma it puts on boys and men, and how it can lead to mental health issues, and also it can lead to violence. And there were authors that were challenging these stereotypes, really encouraging men who show emotional intelligence and vulnerability, and really celebrating men who display these traits. The theme around gender-based violence really looked also at the intersectionality between violence and power in relation to sexual assault and rape culture. There was conversations around emotional and psychological abuse, with people calling out this behavior and also providing support to survivors. Here again, this concept of bullying and mean girl energy came in, with also describing bullying as under the gender-based violence category. And interestingly, there was conversations around online abuse and cyberbullying. So with a lot of conversation around revenge porn. This is very interesting because as technology is evolving and more people are on social media, technology facilitated gender-based violence is rising at an alarming rate, and it really warrants its own whole social media listening research project on looking more into the nuances on that. Another key sub-theme was around male aggression and violence. So the discussion of how many men and boys are also targeted by male violence and are also victims and survivors of male violence. The other main theme was around social norms around culture and tradition. So here there was a lot of data around Lobola. So many people speaking out and saying what a useful and amazing practice and cultural tradition Lobola is. And then other people speaking about the challenges of paying Lobola in the context of high poverty and high employment rate, and how young people are navigating this through different ways, through maybe the woman paying Lobola, or taking out a loan, or living together with, it's called fat and sit, so living together often without telling the parents until they can save up enough for Lobola. So there was a really interesting dialogue around this. Here there was also conversations around the value of women. So some people saying that women who are not virgins or women who have children don't deserve Lobola. Then, as we know, the internet is an international kind of system, so we often get narratives from outside of South Africa influencing the system in South Africa. So there was conversation around trad wife, which refers to a traditional wife, so a woman who is following all these traditional gender norms and really idealizing this versions of domestic life. So there was a lot of conversation around that women should maintain their autonomy and independence, and criticizing how this kind of trad wife movement has really romanticized the stay-at-home mom that's quite like unrealistic. And then other people saying that you know, it's also okay for women to embrace the role to stay at home. Transactional analysis included data and conversations around sugar daddies and blessers, where there were many people posting, looking for sugar daddies and blessers, saying, advertising to try get a sugar daddy or blesser. And then other people raising concerns about how blessers prefer younger girls because they have lower expectations and less body counts. Other concerns around the power dynamic, so saying that older men prefer younger women because they want to control them and they want to do whatever they want with them, such as having unprotected sex and not taking responsibility for pregnancies. And also, again, the double standard was very prevalent here because there's a term for women with younger boyfriends called Ben 10s that people use online on social media. And there was a lot more judgment and hatred targeted at Ben 10s than there was at sugar daddies or blessers. We look a lot at the intergenerational cycles of trauma and violence. And so, of course, parenting is a key theme. And this came up a lot in the data. There were concerns about absentee fathers and how this affects children, but also the judgment that is placed on children who have absentee fathers and the labels that are placed on them. Also, very importantly, conversations around social fathers. So the importance of social fathers and not only focusing on the nuclear family. And a lot of people also celebrating present fathers and dads that are involved in their children's life. But interestingly, this also led to backlash against those men because of other men that were perhaps triggered by that. A very shocking finding was around single mothers, with really hate speech directed at single mothers, criticizing their parenting, criticizing them in people, and saying that single mothers are the cause of gender-based violence in South Africa, of crime, and saying don't say it's a single mother because they have too much trauma. This obviously has far-reaching consequences for women who are already struggling to raise their children as a single mother, and also it has a far-reaching negative consequences for children. Mental health was a very interesting theme because it cuts across all the other themes, where people were talking about the impact of trauma on men, women, and children stemming from childhood experiences. And many individuals expressed the need for healing. Post also drew attention to mental health challenges faced by men and the stigma when it comes to seeking and accessing mental health support. This is really important because we are wanting perpetrators to reach out to heal from trauma and to learn different behaviors. And so if there is this barrier, it's something that really needs to be addressed. What's interesting about the social media listening tools that look at public social media is that you can also see who the influencers are in the conversation and the key voices. So there were many celebrities, influencers, and different role models on both the positive side, so challenging harmful gender norms, and then also on the negative side, voices that disseminated and disinformation and harmful and misogynistic content. What's amazing is that you can find thousands and thousands of men on public social media who are speaking out against gender-based violence and misogyny. And then this goes to the recommendations where you can share resources with them to take action and help prevent gender-based violence and misogyny, and mobilize all these thousands of men who have taken the time to speak out on public social media. Another key influential voice was the impact of reality and TV shows, with many people having conversations online around characters in these shows, which is a very interesting opportunity for edutainment, where they can increase their impact by engaging in the conversations on the online space with digital dialogue facilitation methodology, and also taking the key messaging and creating social media content that they can use in these dialogues. So that was one of the recommendations. The other one, which I've also shared, is mobilizing influencers and allies online, because this means you can do it at scale. Also taking these insights and developing digital dialogues online, so actually going on social media and engaging in these conversations, and using youth-generated social media content to promote dialogue in these conversations. There's also a great need to protect children from online violence and abuse. So we've set up digital school clubs for peer support in schools around this area, and also a need to do more social media listening research directly focused on the harms that children are experiencing online. So it's really important to invest in holistic research and to also explore online environments and social media platforms as a way of supporting people's mental health. So it's really a useful way of understanding people and also reaching people at scale. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to hearing anyone's questions in the chat.
Thank you, Jenna-Lee. Wow. I know while the research focused on the Western Cape, it really mirrors conversations at a national scale. And given the work that you do at a national scale at Tales of Turning, I know from similar reports that you found similar themes when you did social media analysis for the rest of the country. And I think in your presentation, you touched on the importance of parenting and the importance of engaging, the youth, fathers, different groups. And I think it leads us very nicely to our next two presenters. And if there are any thoughts or comments on just what Jenna-Lee has shared, please feel free to put them in the chat and note them down for when we get to the Q&A section. So I'm pleased to introduce our second speaker, Carmen DeVos, and Carmen has been practicing social work for 24 years. She joined the Parent Center in 2013, and she had previously worked at the Child Welfare Society and has experience in investigating child abuse and neglect and statutory work. She's worked with female street children at Onspleak Project, providing counseling and family reunification services. And she also has experience working with seniors and supporting an educare center. And Carmen has grown in her roles at the Parent Center and is currently the PACES manager, where she manages a team of social workers, counselors, and community workers. She is married, happily married, with two beautiful, spirited children, and is passionate about child protection and preserving families. And we're really pleased to hear the insights on the importance of working with parents if we want to shift harmful gender norms. Over to you, Carmen.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Yes, as Senzekile said, I'm Carmen. I'm here from the Parent Center. For those of you who don't know the Parent Center, we're based in Wynberg here in Cape Town. And at the Parent Center, I mean, the name says it all, it's all parenting related. We have four big programs. Our first program is our parent-infant program, where we offer anti and postnatal support to moms at risks. So the support starts even before baby is born, when already we're noticing that mommy is at risk, that support is there for her. And then we offer counseling service to parents regarding any parenting challenge. And then in terms of our training, our two programs, which is our teen parenting program, and our teen parenting program teaches positive parenting and teen parenting to teenagers who are parents or caregivers at schools currently in the Mfuleni area. And then within my team, the PACES team, the biggest training that we offer is our positive parenting skills training, but we also do offer fatherhood training. We offer once-off workshops, on any kind of parenting topic, as well as co-parenting training. So I'm sure we all know that if we're wanting to reduce violence and inequality and emotional disconnection within our families, we need to begin with the daily behaviors that children are observing. And who are they observing? Their parents, because the parents are supposed to be their role models. So with positive parenting, we're teaching parents to parent with empathy, to parent being non-judgmental, and to parent with positive communication. And we trust that we're finding that parents who are then practicing these skills are in turn then role modeling empathy. They're role modeling non-judgmental, and they're role modeling open communication. So in our training, what we do is we help parents to understand their children. So the one thing would be factors affecting behavior, for example. So it's about either parents understanding their children's ages and why the child is behaving a certain way, or it's teaching parents about their children's temperament and, why their child behaves a certain way. And we do so because we're wanting parents to be able to see their children as being unique individuals. We're wanting them to see that their children have different interests, have different abilities. And we're wanting parents to be able to respect that individualism. And by doing so, our children end up feeling self-acceptance. If my parent can accept me the way I am, it gives that child a sense of self-acceptance. And if a child is then experiencing a sense of self-acceptance, the child can go out there and is then maybe more accepting of others. And this could then lead to children then being less likely to conform to societal expectations. Yes, we do discuss gender. Gender is a big topic when it comes to the training. And yes, we do encourage parents to treat children, their boy and their girl child, equally. Jenna also mentioned it in the research. So all we're doing is really saying to parents, be mindful of how you're treating the girl and your boy child, because we're encouraging parents to break those stereotypes. We're encouraging parents to be shifting those gender harmful norms. Again, We're asking parents to look at it as equality and to be teaching them that gender does not determine roles or capabilities. Then I think my favorite out of all is when we're teaching parents, and it's all linked to empathy and feelings, in the session where we speak to parents about listening to children's feelings and really listening empathically. And I mean, here we're teaching parents skills of how to listen. We're teaching parents skills of how to respond positively, how to respond assertively. And I think all of that means we're teaching parents to treat their children with respect. And in turn, there comes that mutual respect. And we do find that if children are feeling heard and understood, they feel empowered. And obviously, that then improves their emotional intelligence. We definitely do encourage parents to allow both boy and girls to express their feelings and to show empathy and how to express their emotion. And that is why we teach them the different skills. And especially with emphasis on the boys, we encourage that because, again, we're wanting to address the notion of toxic masculinity. When we speak to parents about the importance of building their children's self-esteem, not only is it because we're wanting to raise resilient children, but it's also because we're wanting to caution parents about sometimes those negative labels that they place on their children. And sometimes those negative labels are linked to gender. So sometimes, for an example, could be calling a girl child who don't like wearing dresses and not being girly, calling her a tomboy, for example. So we caution parents on not conforming to those type of labels. And again, this highlights the importance of us needing to accept our children for their uniqueness and for their potential. We're always speaking about the importance of quality time and how it strengthens relationship between children and parents. But with quality time also, again, we encourage parents to choose an activity that the child enjoys. Not for you to decide. It's about, what is the child interested in? Again, coming back to individualism and accepting the child for what the child is doing. And we praise those parents who are doing activities without the traditional gender expectations. I salute the fathers. I mean, sometimes when I see the video clips of the daddies who are not afraid to play dress up and have the daughter put makeup on for him, or the mommy that's willing to do the rougher games or play the traditionally male type of sports. Thus again, parents are breaking stereotypes. Then we have, parenting can't be anything without discussing no hitting, in terms of punishment versus discipline with children. And even though in the sector, we're clear on the no hitting, there's still a far way to go within our communities. So when we discuss no hitting and punishment, we look at how do children feel when they're being punished, and what kind of effect can it have. And sometimes parents don't quite understand it. And then in our next session, where we do what we call rethinking violence in parenting, we actually unpack what is domestic violence, what is gender-based violence, and we ask, how are those victims feeling, what are the consequences for those victims. And then it's like then the penny drops that but punishment of children is then also violence. And I think the parent center, the fatherhood program is still only for fathers. And within our co-parenting training, we won't put two co-parents in the same training. But with our positive parenting skills training, it's usually been over the years only mothers coming to the training. The same with counseling, it's mainly been mothers. But we're really seeing more and more fathers not only coming for either one-on-one counseling, but also fathers attending our positive parenting skills training. And it's also just good to hear how both mothers and fathers can then share their joys and challenges of parenting. And by doing so, I think, the feedback that we get from parents is also by mothers sitting and listening to things from a father's perspective, and from fathers then sitting and listening it from the mother's perspective. It's also changing and challenging those types of stereotypes that we had in terms of parenting and our roles. And in conclusion, I'd like to say that when we work with parents, we are not just parenting, but we are transforming gender norms. We're breaking cycles of violence, and we are building healthier families for the next generation. At the Parent Center, we find that meaningful change is possible when parents are supported and they're guided and they're encouraged to parent with empathy, equality, and awareness. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carmen. Wow. I like writing quotable quotes as you were sharing, and just three have stood out in your input. The first being, gender does not determine roles and capabilities. And you also spoke about how when children feel heard and understood, they feel empowered. And that this work is not just about breaking intergenerational cycles of violence, but it's about building the next generation of parents. And that's just so powerful. And I like how you mentioned how you love seeing fathers embody the role of parent and dressing up. And I think it leads nicely to our final speaker. So I'm pleased to introduce Seth Naicker, who is a positive value-based social justice mobilizer who goes about making a difference through speaking, writing, and critical learning. Seth is an MD at Indie Africa, which is a social business investing in nurturing change and fostering transformation. He's also a part-time faculty member at Gibbs with a focus on organizational leadership, social cohesion, and diversity. He consults and designs learning engagements and immersion learning programs with a focus on courageous servant leadership, gender justice, positive masculinity, and building beloved communities in faith and private sector contexts. He's a member or a steering committee member of the Faith Action Collective to End GBV, and he leads a working group on men, masculinities, and the active positive presence of fathers. He's also an ordained pastor within a local church, Church Out of the Box, and is also part of Heartlines. And today, Seth is going to be sharing with us the importance of working with men and fathers and the power of dialogue in fostering positive gender relations that are grounded in respect, equality, and kindness. Over to you, Seth.
Hi, hello everybody. If you're there with us, it's nice to, when the windows are closed, we're not sure if you're listening. I know it's gone on YouTube, where they're streaming live, but if you're willing, please, Zenzi earlier asked if you would be kind enough to show your face or greet us. Please, at this time, I'd like to take a minute just to say hello to you. You've been listening for a long while. So if you would like, please turn on your camera and say hello, just to check that you're there. And in the chat box, if you will, put in your where you're at, what you're enjoying learning. It's always good to have good conversations, and in that way, good to see you all. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to my fellow colleagues, Jenna-Lee and to Carmen. You have made amazing presentations. And as I'm here with you today, my focus is on working with men and fathers. However, when we say working with men and fathers, or working with boys, men and fathers, or working with those who identify as, in their gender identification as being masculine, we must be aware of the realities that we require a whole society to work with our men and fathers. Why, especially in South Africa, and as I listen to Jenna-Lee and listen to Carmen, we are a society where men and fathers are growing up in the context of families. Men and fathers are growing in the context of communities, of institutions. And so in that way, let me put our attention onto these kind of slides that hopefully will help us track together. And I just want to set up my deck so that I don't put in all of these floating symbols here with you. And Richard, if you can give me a thumbs up to let me know that the deck is the way you like it to be. So there we go. All right. Is that looking good out there before I get going?
It looks good.
Awesome. So engaging men and fathers in shifting harmful social and cultural norms. I'd like you to take a moment to reflect on the picture and what comes into your mind very quickly. And in the chat box, if you would, please put some reflections in. As I prepared in reflecting for you all, I think this is where my own story sharing comes into motion, where I've had to make a lot of changes growing up in the society that I grew up in. And I know this is real for many boys, men, and fathers as well, because we are being reared in a society where men are asked to be the strong men, the providing men, not necessarily the co-sharing chores men, the men that are in the home, that are willing to take care of the children and willing to be invested in the house. No, they rather want to be in the garden. So there are social norms, and some of them are unhealthy social norms. So if you're looking at the hashtags, we kind of talk in our practice around positive masculinity, transforming masculinity. I've had the honor to run a workshop on Fathers Matter to end gender-based violence and femicide. And as we think about, the power of story sharing and conversation, it's always important that when we work with people, we create a container of possibility, the safe and courageous space. Now we hear about psychological safety in our learning spaces when we engage people, but we also got to be aware of the space needs to be courageous. So the both ends, safe and courageous spaces. And to work with men and fathers, we really got to get them into the place where they can have the dialogue and they can have the learning. Tell me the fact and I'll learn. Tell me the truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and I will live in, and it will live in my heart forever. Think just about the reality of each one of us. Even as we arrive here today, we carry with us a story. And story sharing is powerful. It has the ability to unlock our imagination. It also has the ability to unlock some of the traumas that we come with. Many of the men and fathers and boys are actually groomed in a society where there's been a story, a historical story that's being told. And we must actually interrogate that story. When we do story sharing through the organization of Heartlines, here's a little kind of a mapping where we talk about the approach of ask, listen, tell. And then what are the values that we use when we want to ask, when we want to listen, and when we want to tell? A lot of the time, people are being told, but no one's really asking questions. Think about the power of questions to unlock those stories. Consider the absence of men and fathers in our society. And as I listen to Jenna-Lee, you can see some of these notions popping through the research. The absence of men and fathers, estimated at about 70%. We know that youth and children are growing up without access to their biological fathers in their home. I work with youth academies and young people, and every retreat or academy that we are in, there is at least about 70% of the young people that we are working with who have, if I can say it this way, a bad daddy story or a negative story to tell about an absent man or father. Let's have a look at this video together.
My dad never misses an opportunity to say, you're gorgeous, you're intelligent, you are everything in a bag of chips. Having my dad around was so important because he taught me what I'm worth from the perspective of a male.
My heart was broken for the first time. I spoke to my dad about it, gave me advice.
Fatherhood is less about doing, it's also a lot more about being.
He has given me a lot of strength.
My grandpa is very nice and I love him and he's in heaven.
A lot of the qualities and values that are embedded in me today came from mom and my dad. So if I play the guitar, my dad actually plays the guitar.
I like to play music with him.
I'm a good footballer, or I think I am.
We win against him. I'm scared of going alone at the shops. Daddy, don't leave me. He takes us to fun places.
It's a great joy to be a grandparent. It's fighting on the bed, it's running around the house.
When he's sleeping, I just bang him on the bum with a pillow.
I try to change things. I want the best for my kids.
Friends, in and amongst those realities of where we're hearing the stories of fathers who are trying to engage their families in a positive way, and also the hurts and pains that come with the traumatic daddy stories or absent men and father stories, we acknowledge the 70% of children in South Africa that grow up without access to their fathers. There is some messaging that is important for us to speak to men. And again, you may have heard it coming through with Jenna-Lee's presentation as well as Carmen's. But we want to see the positive, active presence of men and fathers. We need to transform the toxic masculinity. And so these are some of the key messages that we utilize in our work, in communities, with organizations. Caring and care work for children can be learned by both men and women. And here, coming out of the religious sector, it's important that people have a different theological understanding, because religion and faith comes into play. It informs people's ideologies. So, while there's different ideas and different ideologies, equal gender roles is also an ideology. It's also a religious belief that we need to put out there. So caring and care for work for children can be learned by both men and women. A father's involvement can act as a protective factor and promote the well-being of children. Yes, it's true that if a father is positive, active, and present, the realities around a child being victimized or having to live through the harsh realities of gender-based violence goes down. And so we posture these messages in this way. And then the last one to the right of your screen saying shared decision-making and good communication are essential. These are messaging that we put forward that men become aware of, that, we need you to be involved in shared decision-making. We're not in a world where, as in Afrikaans, we will say, ek is die baas van die plaas. No, we need to let go of that bossery, that boss mindset. That unfortunately is tweaked into, our systems of work. It's tweaked into the fabric of our culture and our everyday life. So these are some of the messaging that we put out in our engagements with people. I remember one man that I met in a workshop a few years ago, and over 3 different workshops in the same area within a landing space of 2 years, 2024 to 2025, I saw the man coming to the first workshop drunk and intoxicated, not dressed well. At the second workshop, he was dressed up, he was awake. He told me that, he's becoming a bit more aware of his circumstances and cut back on drinking. At the third workshop, when we returned to this community, he was now part of the team welcoming people to the workshops that we were doing. So there is possibility to shift the narratives and the harmful social norms. This campaign went out, and these are some of the realities that we are dealing with. We may feel the fatigue, but this is the truth. Women for Change put out the stats. In just 1 year, 5,578 women were murdered. South Africa's femicide rate is 6 times higher than the global average. So we actually don't have time for people to be sitting by and just being bystanders. We need upstanders to get active and positive and present in the fight for a new way of being, a new way of how men and fathers actually are understanding their role in their families, in their communities. We utilize some campaigns. There's Heartlines is now mobilizing a campaign, what can I do? And actually activating people to think creatively and innovatively around what you can do with gender-based violence. And the point I made even last night when we were on radio in an interview saying, when it comes to gender-based violence, pay attention to it's the little things that actually matter. Because before we get to the murder and the rate of murder and the crime and the violence, it starts with how people are socialized. And that means we need to, like we heard Jenna-Lee saying, you know, what are the ways that we're having boys and men being socialized? And are they playing with toys? Or Carmen mentioned, you know, the dress up. Can we flip the script on not having such rigid definitions of what's the role for women, what's the role for men? And if we can shift that, we may be able in the little steps that will lead us to tackling the tough stuff of the tragic and the trauma around gender-based violence. But we need to be considering innovatively what can we do. We also are mobilizing a campaign here where we're talking about men coaching for gender justice. And here we're calling out men who actually have a voice and they have influence and they know that they're already involved in the work with their partners, with their families of gender equality. And here people can be allies. So we believe that there's a lot of people who are out there who have a belief that things have to change, but they're not speaking up. Where are we required to speak up? We're required to speak up in our WhatsApp chats. We're required to speak up in our social spaces online when we see, you know, tragic posts coming out and kind of, oh, I'm just joking kind of stuff. It's a joke, you know, and in that joking is the realities of hard and fast stereotypes, role descriptions that are denying the humanity of women, denying the humanity of the diverse gender others. So these are efforts that we are putting in motion in our work, working with men and fathers. Lastly, this is a resource that I've utilized conversationally and in the story sharing space, that we need to bring men and fathers to the place of interrogating reality, provoking learning, tackling challenges, and enriching relationships. We need to have fierce conversations where we have sit-down times. And the only way we can do that is if that we utilize our family spaces, our social spaces. So in my own practice, whether I'm playing soccer or whether I'm at the university or if I'm at the church or with a youth group, it's in this practice space because we got to practice what we preach. If we don't, we're not going to see a shifting of the harmful norms in our society. Have a look at this. Women belong in the kitchen. Men belong in the kitchen. Everyone belongs in the kitchen. The kitchen has food. And so we got to find ways, messaging that gets people to think. I like this post that came out by the Feminist Vibe, that in the social media space, if we can put out kind of material that gets people to, you know, to think. Social media has the impact that we can reach in what people are consuming out in the media spaces that can impact their learning and their thinking. As I close, here's a reflection. Senzi said she likes some quotes, but I was thinking in the space of the work I do in the academic space, but I think it fits in our everyday life. In practice, I acknowledge that change is not easy, and yet it is required. I'm saying that today in context as a man, as a father, as a husband. It is important to reflect and map out how we deal with change. Once we know our behavior and program responses, we can do some paradigm shifting to help our personal anxieties, fears, and emotions. Managing change in organizational culture calls for us to practice in private what we desire in public. And with those words, I hope that as I've tracked through this presentation, there's been some learning, some cool insights, and hopefully some critical insights that we can go on and do the work that is required. Thank you very much.
Wow, thanks, Seth. I have to point out, I apologize in advance, that the young boy who commented after you said, I'm very good at soccer, or I'd like to think I am, and he was like, we always win against him, that's your son. So just want to acknowledge that we have a future soccer player in that video. And thank you for reminding us of the power of storytelling and having fierce conversations and the importance, I think, what has been shared in the three presentations is understanding that children, especially children, will be emulating the behavior that they see. So how do we also begin showcasing, as you're saying, the kind of behaviors that we want in private and practicing them so that we can begin seeing them in public? And I was just noting when you were showing the video, how it made me feel and how it enlightened something in me of feeling hopeful and just reminded me of what is possible. And I hope that those emotions were shared in the room as well. So we have now reached the Q&A session of our webinar. And this is an opportunity for our participants to ask a question, share a comment, also share your reflections. I know most of the people in the room are also part of this work and engage with various sectors and communities. So it's over to you. You can raise your hand, put a comment in the chat, show your video, and just share any questions or reflections you have for our three speakers. I did see a lot of hands and reactions. Thanks, Jody. Over to you.
Jody, we were getting nervous there. For me, my mind was firing so fast. I'm thinking, come on, guys, this silence is too much, too much.
I've learned how to sit with silence over the years and trusting that people will eventually find the courage to leap over from the should I speak, should I not, should I do it? And Jody, I see that you're unmuted, but I can't hear you. I still can't hear you, Jody. I'm not sure if it's maybe just me or what's happening.
I also can't hear Jody.
Jody says in the chat, there's a problem with my audio, I think. But above, Jody put in a comment, the image shows a stay-at-home father and mother in leaving for work, opposite to traditional gender roles.
Thanks, Seth. I also saw another hand, I think from Salo, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And I see a comment from Ndwaki as well. Ndwaki, would you like to just come in and speak to your comment? Just to add some voices into the room as well.
I don't know if you can hear my audio. It's been terrible today.
Can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you. Yeah, so my question really comes from a mining sector perspective where there's a really strong legacy of tough masculinity, toxic masculinity. People operate and live in a physically tough space, being underground, long hours, very few women in the space who are slowly coming into the sector. And it's quite tough to try and shift these norms. So I was wondering if there's some ideas of how we can hold better conversations, maybe have better awareness programs in a sector where it's so entrenched and it's so reinforced. Thanks.
Thanks, Ndwaki. I see your hand, Jenna-Lee. I just want to check maybe before we get a response if there are any other maybe questions or reflections, and then we can take a round. Emmanuel, do you also want to just speak to your question to bring your voice into the room?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this chance. That is just a question that I would like it addressed maybe by those who have shared their presentation so that I can also learn more and more. Thank you.
Thanks, Emmanuel. And I see, Jody, you've also written your question in the chat, and you are saying, my question is for any of the speakers. I'm interested in your programs in engaging men. How do you approach and engage men without coming across as combative or overly critical? And I see we have another hand from Sally. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Over to you, and then we will hand over to the speakers to respond.
I don't know. Yeah, I have maybe a few comments or questions is around. So the work that I work with Carmen at the Parent Center, and so I run or work in the fatherhood. We do the fatherhood work, and we often find that so we get mostly older fathers. When I say older, they're more late 30s in their 40s, and I often find that the men would say, my life as a man is so performative. I have to go out and I have to, and my relationship is then based on performance. And often they feel, so why must I even go to the doctor when I'm sick? Because I have to, I'm going to die. Let me rather than die. I mean, it sounds serious, but it's rather, why must I go to the doctor? Because for what? Why am I? My question to that is, how do we link the issue of mental health into this whole issue of fatherhood? Because we don't really cover it, although the program in itself it's to make you as a father be okay in your family. It's kind of mental health as well, but not using the exact words. So that's the one thing. And also, how do we as fathers in the sector, I kind of find, and maybe it's a bit of self-criticism, it's like, how do we raise the bar as men? Because the bar is not very high. How do we as men raise it? And I'm not putting myself down or anyone else, but how do I raise it? And then my last question or comment is, as a person working in the field, I mean, I'm in the field daily, the kind of support that we as facilitators need, I think in the sector is kind of absent, because I'm always cautious that when I'm in front of the class, that as facilitator, I don't reinforce patriarchy. I don't reinforce the old stereotypes, and I'm very conscious of it. But often, I think as the fatherhood sector, or whatever you want to call it, don't necessarily have that support for the staff in the field. You kind of work on your own. And there's a lot of support at the Parent Center. Let me clarify that. There's a lot of support. I mean, I go for debriefing often, and that's for the private psychologist. So that helps me. But I think as an entirety, as a sector, we also not coming together and providing that support, even the right words, the right language, all of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I also see that the chat is now on fire. So this is good. So I've noted a couple of questions, and I will just run through them for our speakers and give some suggestion of maybe who can tackle what question, but happy for the speakers to also jump into the other questions. So we had a question from Dwaki just around doing this work in the mining sector. Jenna-Lee, you had raised your hand, so I think you would like to respond to that. And there's also a question from Emmanuel just on how do we measure the impact? How do we measure transformation? And I thought this could be for both you, Jenna-Lee, just speaking about how do you measure the shifts and track sort of like changes in gender norms or conversations through your work, and for you as well, Carmen, as the work that you do in the Parent Center is also about, transforming behavior. How do you measure and track the impacts that you are having with the participants that come to your work? And then we have the two questions just around mental health and fathers, and how do we raise the bar as men? And I'm handing those over to you, Seth, together with the question from Jody on how do we approach and engage men without coming across as combative or critical. And I think you, Carmen, as well can come in terms of that one. Jenna-Lee, can I hand over to you?
Wonderful, thanks. I think those were really insightful questions and points that were made. So I think when engaging men both in the mining sector and difficult contexts, I think it's really important to do it in collaboration with the men themselves. So in dialogue. So the first thing is to use language that is relatable to men. So that's what we can see through the social media listening research. So if we start, if we come into these conversations and we're using language that we use in the sector, like we come in and say we want to talk about toxic masculinity and how men need to be vulnerable and patriarchy, it often and gender equality, it often shuts conversation down. So start from where the men are at, and ask curious questions. And I think it's really important, not only the mining sector obviously has very harsh physical conditions, but in society itself, just telling men, oh, you must be vulnerable with emotions, it can come at a huge cost and be really difficult. So we need to go on that journey together. I think a really good example that I can use is we did work with the taxi industry. And the aim was to engage men to prevent gender-based violence, but we didn't go in there with all these conversations and ideas. We started by asking them first, what is difficult for you? What are your needs? And they expressed how that they actually feel excluded from the community. They don't feel like they can belong. They don't feel like they belong. And they feel that they don't have the communication skills to interact in a different way that is not aggressive. And so from that, we could start building the dialogue skills, start building how you can have these conversations. And from that, we got champions. We got people wanting to run gender-based violence campaigns from the taxi drivers themselves. So it's looking for those internal champions. I think the other thing that would stand out for me is around narrative therapy. So in narrative therapy, we look for sparkling moments. So we look for those moments where the problem isn't present. So are there moments in the mining sector when someone does show care? It could be a simple way of like asking your friend how they are, or sharing food, or just something really simple, but looking for those moments and building on them. So we're not coming from the outside and saying, now we all have to sit here and have deep conversations about our emotions, because that is very, it's very like different from that space. But how can we go and build it together in a way that works to that space? And it is through dialogue, through co-creation, through reflection, and using language that meets people where they're at.
Thanks, Jenna-Lee. And do you have any response to the question just around measurement? How do we measure transformation of gender norms and attitude in a way that correlates directly with verifiable violence indicators?
I think it's a really great question, because that measurement obviously is complex. So I think the best way is to use mixed methods. So one of the tools we use is a social media listening tool, because then you can see shifts in the narrative, how it's changing over time, and use that as part of a baseline. Then we also use surveys to collect data. Obviously, there's also the statistics that are presented. So I think it's best to use as many indicators as possible and use those mixed methods, because it is such a complex societal issue that we're looking at. Yeah.
Okay, and just from my side, in terms of transformation, so the Parent Center, we really hoping to have, some type of research, definite research in terms of longitudinal studies and that. But I think the only way we do get the feedback is through our evaluations and comments from our participants. So our training is 8 sessions, so it's over an 8-week period. And hearing how somebody speaks negatively about their children or towards their children in session 1 and 2, and then by session 7 and 8, hearing them speak differently, hearing them talk about the robot skill, hearing them acknowledge that they overreacted to a certain incident. I think that in itself gives us some indicator that it has changed. And then also, I mean, we do get some referrals from the children's court where maybe either children are currently at risk of being removed or children have been removed, and those parents are then also referred to us for positive parenting skills training.
Thanks, Carmen. And I think what you're speaking to, even with Jenna-Lee, what she's speaking to is that given the nature of the work, sometimes it's hard to measure tangible output. So you're kind of looking at what's the outcome and tracking the stories and the changes as measuring like the different outcomes that are emerging. And before I hand over to you, Seth, you would see that there's a poll that just popped up on your screen. So this is a regular poll that we do in our webinars, and we would just appreciate you taking a few minutes to just fill it in. It's really helpful in helping us understand what was valuable for you in this webinar and what we can do differently. Over to you, Seth, just responding to the questions on mental health and how do we raise the bar for men?
Thank you for guiding my mind, because the conversation is so divine. It's bouncing all over the ceiling. Yeah, so let me start with mental health. I think that's a key factor for the pains that men and fathers are carrying. Like, if the provision reality is there, we must measure what it is. So if we look into our communities, like I work in Joburg South, the community I've worked in over the last 3 years in Annandale, there are women at work and many men who are unemployed based on the realities of the work availability, how men have become, kind of irrelevant in the workspace. And we notice that we then must interrogate what is the provision gap. So if your wife is working and you are making life happen, how are you actually showing up if you're not bringing an income? So one of the things that we do in the coaching insights is say, but there's still work. They may not be paid work, but there's work, clean the house, work with the kids. But again, it's hard because these are not gender norm roles for men. Men won't just, pick up a brush and a cleaning detergents and go and clean the toilets or get into the kitchen and start cooking a meal. So what we see happening is where there is income and the wife is working, there's still the burden of now coming home and covering. So in the reality of life, people are eating, people are going on. Life is not easy, right, Senzi? But we see men kind of choosing to say deactivated, staying far from where they can actually pick up the pieces. So, and again, I must also say this is not for all men. It depends on what kind of culture you grew up in. Like if you learned how to clean toilets and cook and clean at home, then you're going to get involved and invested. But the mental health of men needs to be considered. How are they feeling? What's their emotions like? Do they know practices of when it's getting too hot to handle? If you've been socialized in a very combative culture, I have, right? Joburg South, those of you that know us here in the landscape, sorry, generally we're not in the Western Cape, but if you know us in the Joburg South, it's a combative culture, the kind of lingo, language, it's aggressive. Sometimes when I'm just talking in tonality, people get scared. I have to almost make my voice seem very postured and very polite, okay? So men have to unlearn so much of what they've been socialized in. The mental health space of, like, for me, what has helped is how do I get away to quiet reflection? My son just yesterday, because we're doing so much around the GBV campaigns, I asked him, he's a 14-year-old. He said, Dad, sometimes men have to learn that if their anger is getting up too much, they better walk away so they don't hurt the person that they're standing next to. He said, well, young boys have to learn this. So the mental health component, and as Sally said, we need to have, this is where in the faith sector, we need faith sector people who have, I would call, acumen. And this is my contention. Here, my brain fires into kind of a little bit more fierce. You can't have a weak formula to engage men and our society. I'm not saying it shouldn't be compassionate and empathetic, but like Dr. King said, we have to have some fierce urgency. I'd say we have to have some fierce courage, because if you're coming into the room and you're sitting in a space where there's people that are toxically masculine. I mean, when I'm talking about the guy that had a change experience over 3 workshops, I want you to believe that when he came into the first workshop, he was a problem. He was talking out of ways. I had to settle him down and say, as a facilitator, listen, dude, if you're going to spend this time with us here, we want you to be here posturing in a respectful way. And I said, I can see that you're drunk. And this is as a facilitator, pulled him to a side. But I want you to know that it doesn't mean that you are drunk, that you can do what you like. So this requires some courage. And I think if we can talk more about what do we do in the soft wiring that helps men to engage. And I want you to know that it's not easy. With the groups that I work with in men's circles, men's dialogues, they have defenses. Now there's a talk about, women, what are they doing? We are just here. What about the men? I need to come back into existence. So I think this is important. And then the other reality that I wanted to speak to is how do we take care of ourselves? For those men like Sally, there are men out there that, are doing the work. We are facilitators of the work. I think part of it is that I know that I haven't arrived. And this might speak to our other colleagues' messaging, is that we're on a learning journey. So I'm grateful for my partner, Marisha, who is very challenging to me. And if I share it today, I hope, I'm not being too transparent, but I was, when I married Marisha, I didn't even want her to tell me that she's not carrying my last name. When she told me, she said, oh, you're not gonna take, I got angry. I even said a thing to her like, hey, listen, if you're in the car, we were in Lens. And I told her, no, you can't be in this car with me. So they required a strong partner to challenge me. And this is where we require, not to say that women already don't have burdens on themselves, but I'm saying this to us. Women that have agency need to use it well, not just for themselves, but for the community. So like I say to my mother, say, Mom, you're a strong woman. You need to speak to the men in our community. So the answer is not just lying with men themselves. It's also lying with women. I mean, like, if I stepped out of order, I can tell you straight up, and there's many men who know, they are scared for their mothers, but they beat their wives, right? And we have to answer this question in our communities. How are we going to help heal our communities in that way? So I'll pause there. I have a lot more to say, but I think just for the purposes of hearing others. Thank you.
Thanks, Seth. Thank you. I think we just have a few more minutes to take any other reflections or comments before we come to a close. I think you've answered not only Sally's question, but also the question that Jody had raised just around how do we actually engage men. And you've shown how it's not easy. I think that message is also shared by Jenna-Lee. It's not easy. It requires commitment and deliberate, as you said, fierce courage. Yes, Seth, I see you.
And yeah, I just want to say also, like, while and even when you hear me today, I'm feeling emotive, but sometimes that emotiveness will be picked up culturally as angry. No, I'm not angry, but I am emotional about the fact that 5,587 women died again this year. Some of us got to be crying about this. And yet I see in our society of leaders, and this is both women and men, who don't, like yesterday, we went to some party that we were at. Nobody reflected on the fact that it was the start of, the 16 days of activism. I was in an interview where someone said to me, oh, but we're tired of hearing. I said, yeah, but even if we're tired, this is the fact of what's happening. So, but on the other side, like, I think I want to agree with Jenna-Lee that we have to have courage, but you got to have this balance of humor. Like I tell jokes. Now people might say, no, it must be because you got neurological diversity that you're joking. We need it. We have to laugh in the pain. But imagine when I'm using jokes in a Guara culture. That may not sit well with the English speakers. But if you work in our society, and maybe the researchers need to join us in, I love some of the terminology that Jenna-Lee used today. You know, it might, to some people, it might sound rude to their ears, but it was up in your face. This is the reality of what's happening in the lingo and the language on the streets, and how far academic kind of research is from, you know, being grounded. So we need humor. I laugh a lot when we in our workshops. Yes, we're talking tough stuff, and I'm not scared to say, hey, how strong are you? I make a joke with a man. Hey, hoe sterk is jy? As jy sterk, are you strong? So how strong can you be? I mean, even the strongest man is not that strong, because guess what? Patriarchy is also hurting men. So I think the balance of humor, courageous engagement is our South African way. Like, you know, we know how to have fun. So we got to bring that into the learning systems. And in that way, I hope that we can, you know, do the unlearning to do the new learning. Thank you.
Thank you. Jenna-Lee, Carmen, any last comments that you would like to share?
I think from my side, but yes, I mean, so, you know, as ours is about parenting, but something that Seth said now is, I don't know if he said it was his son who said, like, men need to be taught when they get angry, they need to walk away. And again, it comes back to us, but teaching our children to be able to verbalize. I'm feeling really angry now. I need a 5-minute break. I need a 10-minute break. For our children to be, you know, here's a bubble gum, their tension release, go play with the pet outside. I am feeling this pent up anger. Teach them how that hot feelings is coming inside of the body, meaning that the anger is pushing up. But if we're not teaching them that from a young age, then unfortunately, you know, things go. But I think I just want to say thank you very much for having me here this morning. And really just encouraging everybody to continue practicing positive parenting and encouraging more positive male role models.
Thanks, Carmen. Jenna-Lee, I hope when you share, you can also just speak to where we can find the research report, as it was such a rich presentation. And I know that the report as well offers even more insights into what you found when you did the analysis. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Senzi. So to lead on from what Carmen was saying, and also the mental health thread, I think it's very important. So there's a lot of neuroscience and psychology that shows that people learn to emotionally regulate during their childhood. So that emotional regulation is done originally co-emotional regulation with parents and their children. That when a parent is caring for their child, is meeting their needs, it actually forms the neural pathways that help you to emotionally regulate. So really the importance of that. And when a child is exposed to violence in childhood, it affects the development of their brain. Obviously, there's neuroplasticity, so it's not to say that people can't learn new behaviors, but all of this early exposure to violence and positive parenting, it really plays a huge role in this ability. People responding in violence is people that don't know how to regulate their emotions. So really the importance of this, then also the importance of shame. So lack of the ability to emotionally regulate, then experiences of shame. Violence is a way of warding this off. So we really need to be looking at that, like exactly what Carmen is doing with this positive parenting. It's so vitally crucial. And then also the mental health cuts through all of this, encouraging people to reach out if they to take care of their mental health, I think is really important. For the research, I will put my my email address in the chat, and anyone that wants to access the research can reach out. And I'll also send it to you, Senzi, that you can share it with anyone that is interested. Also, our website, Tales of Turning, you can reach out to us on our website, Tales of Turning, and we can send through the research to you.
Thanks, Jenna-Lee. I will try and pop the link to the website in the chat as well. But I do want to take this opportunity to say thank you to you, Jenna-Lee, to Carmen, as well as to Seth, for your deep reflections that have really, gotten my mind bubbling. I think what I take away from this webinar today, from the research that you shared, Jenna-Lee, is the complexity of gender norms, is how these social media conversations really show us how South Africans are grappling with these issues. And I think what you spoke to even at the end is that there is an opportunity to be engaging, and finding champions either through social media or also in-person dialogue that are also wanting to challenge and shift these harmful norms. And I think, Carmen, what you spoke to about the importance of intervening early and supporting parents to be able to instill these values in their own children and to understand that gender does not determine roles or capabilities, and how through their transforming their parenting, they transform the parents of the future. And definitely the power of storytelling and fierce dialogue is what I'm taking away from what you shared, Uncle Seth. And also through showing your video, showing us how we can shift and show people that it is possible by also telling the stories that are of present fathers, of how present fathers have touched the lives of their children all the way through to even adulthood. So I hope that this webinar has been fruitful for everyone who has joined. It was being recorded and will be available on the ISS's websites as well as the YouTube channel. And we will be having our last webinar of this series of showcasing violence prevention interventions and action on the 10th of December. And I hope that you can join us and share the invites with your network as well. Thank you once again to our speakers. Thank you to everyone for joining. I hope you have a good day, and feel free to email, reach out to Jenna-Lee, reach out to Seth, and have a good day.